Well, new study from Washington State University finds that getting outside and into nature is really crucial for kids' mental and physical health. And joining us now is Amber Fife Johnson. She is with the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine with Washington State University. Great to talk with you, Amber.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, and so you guys, it sounds like you went through just volumes and volumes of research for this.
We did. I think the goal and purpose of the study was that we wanted to know, well, we knew first and foremost there was a lot of literature in this field, but we wanted to summarize it. Sometimes when there's such a huge volume, taking the time to really comb through each and every one of the papers that looks at what you're interested in can be really important. So that's what we decided to do.
And you found that getting outside, not just outside, but into a natural settings, and that really is important for kids.
That's right. And I think that distinction is really critical. So, for example, one of the things we point out in the paper is that a parking lot is not a playground, right? While both may have asphalt, they're very different locations. So we were really interested in looking at outdoor spaces that had elements of nature in them, and elements of nature that kids could interact with, and how that impacts health outcomes in childhood.
And so I guess the goal maybe of research, or where it could be used maybe by governments that are trying to decide how much green space do we provide, and some of those kinds of issues.
That's right. I think that there's a number of groups of people that could use this information. I think policymakers certainly, legislators certainly. I think also spaces like schools, so school administrators, pediatricians, because kids need outdoor spaces throughout their lives, right? So it's not just at school they need to be outside, or when they're at home they should be outside, but that we have lots of opportunities where kids are throughout their day, where they live, where they learn, where they play, to increase the amount of outdoor time children are getting. And so I think this research, my hope, and the hope of the group more broadly, this is applicable to lots of different spaces, right? So physical health is important, not just in a pediatrician's office, but also in a school space and in a home space.
Awesome. So in your research, did you find that there were some, are there areas in this, let's say this state, right? Are there areas in the state that have a better use of natural space for kids, or versus those that really don't? Or was it more of a very broad sort of look at this is what needs to happen in order to
get a better outcome?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so I think that when the literature is so heterogeneous, right? The types of nature exposure can range from green space around a home, green space around a school, wilderness experiences, etc., blue space experiences, that what we try to do is categorize nature exposure into the enough categories that we felt like we were getting some granularity to different types of natural exposure and nature exposure for children, but also not so granular that we were just getting in the weeds. So I think what we found was primarily that green space around home and school were most associated with positive health outcomes in childhood. But that's primarily because that's where most of the literature are being done, right? So that's not to say that an outdoor wilderness experience doesn't have a positive impact on health. It's just that there's not a lot of literature to support that, because it hasn't been done, not because there are negative impacts, but just because there hasn't been as much research done. So, but the two areas of nature exposure that we found most compelling were green space around home and school, because the volume of research in those two areas was high, and the quality or the strength of evidence within both of those categories in the home space was high, and in the school space was moderate in terms of strength of evidence.
Okay. And I suppose that even families could use this just as a motivation to get out and, make sure their kids are getting outside and not just out playing in the street with friends, but actually having some meaningful escapes into maybe the national parks or even our local parks.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think it can also be very proximal. And by that, I mean families can choose what they want to do with their small amount of spare time, right? Like families have a lot to do. So state parks are an amazing adventure and are fantastic, but I think there's also a lot of natural elements in many neighborhoods. So, you can go for a walk and interface with the natural elements, meaning the trees and the grasses and the bushes. You can pay attention to those elements, interact with those elements, or you could go and play on the swings. And so I think I would encourage families to explore the spaces that exist locally. And I think this is an important piece that is unfortunate but true, that access to nature-rich outdoor spaces is not equitable. Not all neighborhoods have these opportunities. And so I think my hope is also that this paper catalyzes policymakers and people making decisions about land use policies and what goes in what spaces to think about including green space as a more important space than they did before for child's health.
Well, and I guess were you able to get an idea of why a green space is more important than, say, like you said, a parking lot or a paved playground, that sort of thing? What is it about it that makes it, I guess, just a more healthful environment?
So I think from a really deeply mechanistic perspective, we don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity to know exactly what interacting with an outdoor space does. So I think the main and most conclusive answer I would give you is that one of the primary health outcomes that we found most compelling was physical activity. So when kids are outside, they're more likely to be physically active. And we know about all the health-promoting effects of physical activity, and there's something about engaging in a natural space that encourages children to be more physically active. So that's a very broad mechanism, but a very clear mechanism, because you can kind of attach all the deeper mechanisms, what we know that physical activity does for the body, because so much is already known. But for example, we found that exposure to natural spaces improve cognitive, behavioral, and mental health. And while we know that we feel pretty strongly that evidence is strong, we don't necessarily know why. So we don't know exactly why the exposure to natural spaces was having positive impacts in that area. And I think that's a great area for other smart humans to do more research in.
All right. Or you guys.
Yeah. I mean, I think this paper is sort of catalyzing a lot of people who are in this space to do slightly more narrower work, right? Like once we know the answer to some of these bigger questions, you can kind of take that responsibility off your shoulders and do something a little bit more nuanced. And I think that's the beauty of science. As we learn more, we can always go deeper in terms of like the mechanistic pieces and the deeper whys of why it's happening.
Yeah, well, you guys do some amazing research at Washington State. And once again, Amber Fife Johnson, Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health there at Washington State University's Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. Great to talk with you, Amber. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me today. Take care.